Okay, so we've been studying Leviticus. We've talked about, I hate to keep going back over this. I know y'all are getting tired of it, but you have to have the context for it to work. We talked about how the children of Israel came out of Egypt, how they saw the plagues, they saw God working and how he worked for them. They crossed the Red Sea. They sang songs of joy, they grumbled, they got punished, and they started realizing, hey, God is in our midst, and we've got to learn how to live with him. And so we go through this, and we had this big, long section from chapter 1 through chapter 7 about rules of sacrifices. These are part of the way of how you can live with God in your midst. Excuse me, or how they could live with God in your midst. And then chapters 8 through 10 went back to the narrative form that we were reading in Exodus for a very short section. And then chapter 11, where we are today, starts back in the rules section. It's no longer narrative. And it's important that we remember that these scriptures were not written as it happened. They were written later. So when we see these rules put in place and then it goes to narrative, there's a reason for that. And then it goes back to more rules. And I believe the reason for this is, is in Leviticus 10:3, when after Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, had been killed by God, punished by God, however you want to say that, God made the statement that I will be sanctified by the people that come near to me. And so he was saying, in essence, that they weren't, therefore they were punished. And so that ties in very much with what we were reading back in the first 7 chapters, as well as in chapter 11 through 15, because in those chapters, God repeatedly says, I am holy, so you should be holy. Or you will be holy. You shall be holy because I'm holy. So, excuse me. So, we're starting to see this connection here, and I want us to think a few minutes about the tabernacle. Now, most of the times when we talk about the tabernacle, we talk about the outer wall and the courtyard and then the holy place and the Holy of Holies. When the Bible says tent of meeting or tabernacle, a lot of times it's specifically talking about this area here. But in what we're talking about right now, I want you to think of the whole area. What inside this area, the outer walls, is holy? What are some things that are in there that's holy?
The ark is in there, isn't it?
The ark is in there, that's holy. The utensils, the bowls, candlesticks, table to show bread. Those are things that are in there that are holy. Why are they called holy? They're set apart. Set apart in the sense that they're dedicated. They're there for use and worship of God. Now I want you to think about something. In this whole area, is there anything that's not holy? The only thing I could possibly come up with was the refuse from the sacrifices. But even that, if you remember, I got to look at the passage. I've forgotten which one it was. Chapter 6, verse 11 is one example where it talks about these things were carried outside the camp to a clean place, which implies that even the refuse from the sacrifice was holy. Now, there's some other things that are in this area that we didn't talk about for a second. Who could not go into this courtyard? Who could not go into the courtyard? What? The unclean was not supposed to, okay? But who was not allowed in? The Gentiles. The Jews were allowed into the courtyard. And who was allowed into the holy place? The priests. The priests. So we see that this courtyard was limited in the people that could go into it or who could go into it. And the holy place was limited. And the Holy of Holies, who could go into that? The high priest once a year. In essence, that area was almost totally dedicated to God. God was almost the only person that could go in there. Only one other person, one time a year, and there had to be special things that happened, special rites, special cleansings that had to happen before he could do that, and he had a very specific mission. Excuse me. Now, as we think about that for a minute, some of the things that have always crossed my mind, wouldn't it get kind of dusty in there? And wait a minute, remember, this was a tabernacle. It moved. How did they move it without going in there?
They let the curtain down on top of it when they lifted it up.
That's the supposition. Yeah, it was that they took the curtains down first and then took the pieces down. And so it's, you think, okay, so maybe it didn't get dusty. So my mind wanders when we get in stuff like this. So it's kind of interesting to think about that. Well, they couldn't go into the Holy of Holies, but they could take the curtains down from the outside. See, it was a tent. The whole thing was a...
Yeah. And there was a veil or something.
Mm-hmm. The veil between the two. So yes, so we see that. Now, we understand that these things and the people were considered holy. They were dedicated to God. So why is God called holy? Called holy. Why is, God says, I am holy. What does he mean when he says that? He's You've got the right idea there. I think it's that he is so far different from his creation, from everything else. I was reading and I saw one writer wrote this. He said, God is set apart in the sense that he is separate from sin, corruption, and impurity. He is perfect in all ways. He is exceptional in a category by himself, unmatched by any other being or thing in the universe. So I say he's special, really. And this comes back to where we started talking about when he said, I will be sanctified by those that come near me. So we're seeing this type of concept where God is showing them how they should be like him. If you turn to Leviticus 11:44 and 45, this kind of sums up what we're saying here. And this is kind of the beginning of the summation, if you want to say, of this chapter. 44 says, For I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am holy. You shall not defile yourself with any swarming thing that crawls on the ground. For I am the Lord who brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall therefore be holy as I am holy. So we're thinking about how it's important that we think about how the Israelites were thinking about these laws, how they understood them. Because we know, we've talked about this, that these laws don't apply to us in specifics. but there's some things we can learn from them. And you can't, what?
As I said, it was
A mindset. There's some things we can learn from this, and some things that are brought over. For instance, go to 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 15. This is a pretty simple passage. But as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, since it is written, ye shall be holy, for I am holy. Today, we are supposed to be holy. So how do we make ourselves holy in the sense that they were? You can't read these chapters and not think about, okay, how do these things that are talking about the priest of the Old Testament, these things that are talking about being clean and unclean, how is that working with me today? So we need to remember that we need to be holy. Now, one last thing before we go into actually get into chapter 11, and that is, I want you to remember something. Remember the sacrifice that was called a sin sacrifice that a lot of people are calling purification sacrifice? One of the major things that happened with that sacrifice was the blood was taken into the holy place, sprinkled on the veil. It cleansed the things that you mentioned as being holy in the holy place, as well as the altar outside in the courtyard. So one of the things we need to understand, we have a problem understanding this clean, unclean thing. There were things that were in the tabernacle, that could be unclean. That's what some of the sacrifices were for, was to cleanse them. Having said that, notice that they had to be dealt with. It couldn't be left in that status. Now, additionally, we will see as we go through this chapter that some things that became unclean, not necessarily in the tabernacle itself, but some things that became unclean had to be destroyed. So just some information there. Okay, Leviticus chapter 11 can be summed up in verse 46 and 47. This is the law about the beast and the bird and every living creature that moves through the waters and every creature that swarms on the ground, to make a distinction between the unclean and the clean, and between the living creature that may be eaten and the living creature that may not be eaten. Once again, a follow-up from Leviticus 10:10 that says, you are to distinguish between the holy and the common, the unclean and the clean. Now, to start with, the word clean here, the Hebrew word that is translated clean, Vine's Hebrew dictionary says that word means to be clean, to be pure, that it is to be the word denotes the absence of impurity, the absence of filthiness, defilement, or imperfection. It is applied concretely to substances that are genuine or unadulterated, such as gold, as well as describing an unsustained condition of a spiritual or ceremonial nature. Excuse me. So, as we see these rules, they're the purpose, what it's saying. These rules are here so that you can tell the difference between what is clean and unclean, so that you can tell the difference between what is holy and common, what is set apart and what is just there. So, chapter 11 through 15 is organized like this. You have clean and unclean foods, contact with animal carcasses, cleansing with childbirth, laws concerning skin diseases in people, and so forth. When I first put this together, I originally wanted to cover all this in one class. Last week taught me different. There's just so much you can do in one class. I kind of spewed forth on y'all, and I apologize for that. So we're going to do chapter 11 this week, and I want you to think about how we're applying chapter 11, how we're understanding chapter 11, and then go back and, as I asked you last time, read 11 through 15 again, and we'll try to cover 12 through 15 next week. With that, we won't be going quite as in depth as we do this week. Leviticus chapter 11, verses 1 through 3. And Jehovah spake to Moses and Aaron, saying unto them, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, These are the living things which you may eat among all the beasts that are on the earth. Whatsoever parteth the hoof and is cloven-footed, and cheweth the cud, among the beasts that ye may eat. Excuse me again. Okay, so I want to ask a question to start with. Why did God put these rules in? Other than so that they could discern between clean and unclean, what they could eat and what they couldn't eat, we don't really know. But there's a lot of things that are proposed. For instance, one of the things I've heard all my life, and is true, is that because of these laws, the Hebrew nation was far ahead of everybody else of that time frame in their health, the way they dealt with their health. While other countries were putting excrement on wounds to help heal it, yes, they did that. That was part of what they did in Egypt. The Hebrews were said, no, you clean wounds. Check to see other. So, yes, that's true, but that doesn't explain all of it. And some people have put forth that these were a ritual cleansing. And we say ritual, it just says cleansing because we realize that not everything that it talks about as far as cleansing on the outer body was really what it was talking about. But once again, that doesn't cover it all because some things just make absolutely no sense. But the one thing that does make a lot of sense, discipline, yes, that's a good reason because they learn to be disciplined. And that actually ties into the point I was about to make. And that is that, let me ask you, think about this. If you are working with somebody and y'all go out to eat, and the first time you go out to eat, they eat a salad. You don't think anything about it. The next time you go out to eat, they eat something very similar. And before too long, you say, are you vegetarian? Because of the way they were acting, of what they were doing. We can see that. And part of what God was doing was he was saying, this is the way I want you to be. This is so different from the rest of the world that they will be able to see you and see that you are set apart for God, that you are my people. And that does relate to us today. We can see that. So let's finish up this section 4 through 8 here that goes with the first 3 verses. And I'll be reading, reading this out of the English Standard Version. Nevertheless, among those that chew the cud or part the hoof, ye shall not eat these, the camel, because it chews the cud, but does not part the hoof, is unclean to you. And the rock badger, because it chews the cud, but does not part the hoof, is unclean to you. And the hare, because it chews the cud, but is not part the hoof, is unclean to you. And the pig, because it parts the hoof and is cloven-footed, but does not chew its cud, is unclean to you. You shall not eat any of the flesh, and you shall not touch their carcasses. They are unclean to you. Now, first of all, we need to realize that the way we understand some of this and the way that the Hebrews understood some of this is different. Today, we understand that when an animal chews the cud, and we'll take a cow as an example here, they're called ruminants. It's our science technical term. They will take some grass or whatever it is they're eating, and they'll chew it, and it moistens it. And then it goes into their first stomach. They have a series of stomachs. And that stomach then will digest or partially digest the food. Then that food is regurgitated back up. They chew it again, and it goes into the second stomach. That is chewing the cud. Guess what? Rabbits don't do that. And yet it says rabbits chew the cud. Rabbits actually regurgitate and chew, but they don't have the stomach set up. Camels are pretty much the same way. They don't have the stomachs set up. So what we may define as chewing the cud is different from what they understood it. So what did it mean? What was the importance of chewing the cud? It meant that they were really working on it. Now, what is the food we're supposed to be eating? What did Jesus say food was? What is our food supposed to be? Not physical food, spiritual food. The Word of God. The concept here that many people put forth is that the relationship between that and today is that they're really working on, they're meditating. It's a reference to meditation, or really chewing on, thinking about the Word of God. Now, whether that's actually true, I don't know, but it falls into the category of a shadow that we can see. The closest we can come to actually proving that would be the concept of Jesus about, I must be about my Father's business. And we have the remembrance type things. So it's, whether that's a perfect correlation or not, I don't know. Yes, sir.
The Hebrew word for meditation is hagah, which is the sound that the lions or different animals make when they're chewing, which is
So
that's the word for meditation.
So it's an interesting concept here on how, okay, maybe this does relate to us to a certain way. And it's, are we supposed to only eat these animals? No. But if we think of it spiritually, that's one way we could. What about cloven hoof? Just in case you're not a farm person and you don't know what a cloven hoof is. I got a picture of one, yeah. What does the Word of God do? Divides. So, yeah, we can see some correlations when we apply spiritual constructs to it. Once again, how they understood it was, to be clean, I need to only eat these animals. What was the result of not being clean to the Hebrew? What? They couldn't worship God. One really good example that we were given in the first 7 chapters was of the peace offering. When somebody ate the peace offering in an unclean state, that was a disastrous situation. So here we see, the importance to them was, number one, they couldn't worship God. Once again, they're learning to live literally with God in the middle of their camp. Yes, sir. Battery says it's 100%, but it's not working. Sorry about that. excuse me.
The word divides.
Word divides, yeah. Thank you. Sometimes, you have to have coffee to get going, and although I had 2 cups, maybe that wasn't enough to get my mind going. The word divides, and so once again we see a correlation between where we can and how we can move these. Now, this brings up a little bit of a point where we can talk about some of the translations. Because especially when you get over into the birds, they have like 4 different words that can be translated vulture. Or are translated vulture, I should say. So when the translator does it, they translated each one different. If you go to different versions, you're going to see a wide disparity in the naming of some of these birds. So there's a translation issue here. But when we talk about the birds, we'll get to the vulture. But understand that sometimes there's a problem communicating some of the specifics of these rules to us because we don't have the Hebrew background that they had. Some of it's a little dead as far as language goes, so that gives us an issue there. And just real quickly, it talks about, you're not supposed to touch these unclean animals. Be thinking about, okay, I'm not supposed to touch them. What happens if I touch them? What happens if I accidentally touch them? This type of concept. So let's move on to fish real quick. 3 verses, verses 9 through 12. And these you may eat of all that are in the waters. Everything in the waters that has fins and scales, whether in the seas or the rivers, you may eat. But anything in the seas or rivers that does not have fins and scales of swarming creatures, some versions will say teeming, some versions will say crawling. So in the waters and of the living creatures that are in the waters is detestable to you. Many versions use the term abomination instead of detestable. You shall regard them as detestable. You shall not eat of their flesh, and you shall detest their carcasses. Everything in the waters that does not have fins and scales is detestable to you. What were the children of Israel eating every day? Manna and quail. They were in the desert. Fish. Well, they did have the, now my brain's gone dead again. What do you call those places where they have water in the desert? Oases. They did have the oasis, and they may have had fish in them, or snakes, or eels, or whatever. I don't know. But once again, the concept here is, okay, this is what is going to separate me from the common. This is what's going to separate me from being unclean, is if I stay away from those. So it's, got one note here I want to check real quick. Yeah, okay. So we can see what's happening with the fish. Now, I'm sure that all of you just really are excited about eating eels and worms, stuff like that. I know I'm not. It wouldn't be hard for me to detest or to, and we'll get to see some even worse things. But as we think about these things that they're eating, and we try to, or not eating and eating, and we try to say, okay, spiritually, how does that relate to me? We keep coming back to this thing where they are some things that just are not supposed to be. I may not know the reason why, but God has said, that's not what you do. Verses 13 through 19. And these shall detest among the birds. They shall not be eaten. They are detestable. The eagle, the bearded vulture, the black vulture, the kite, the falcon of any kind, every raven of any kind, the ostrich, the nighthawk, the seagull, the hawk of any kind, the little fowl, the cormorant, the short-eared owl, the barn owl, the tawny owl, the carrion vulture, the stork, the heron of any kind, and the hoopoe and the bat. I had to look up what a hoopoe was, but I won't go into that. But what birds were clean?
The ones that were not scavengers or predators. Or the type
What? That does seem to be the case here. But specifically, what birds do we know that are clean? Turtle doves and pigeons, because they were used in sacrifices. Now, having said that, what are some of the birds that make the biggest messes in Florida? Pigeons. And you know, they're the bane of many cities. So, you know, we just don't associate with this real well. But, you know, once again, you get back to how many of you have ever actually seen a vulture? Can you imagine eating a vulture? The word ick doesn't describe it. And yet they had to be told. And it does appear that most of these have to do with raptors that are eating blood. We do see that as we look at them, and we do know that there is the commandment that they were not to eat blood. So maybe that has something to do with it. But once again, applying it to us, we see that, okay, there is a difference in what we are to eat spiritually and what we are not to eat spiritual. What do we consume? Wait a minute. When we think about spiritual and consuming, what comes to mind? How many of you watch TV? How much do you see in the TV that you shouldn't be consuming? Probably. You know, what we take in does make a difference, but we'll get to that in a minute. So we'll keep going here. Verses 20 through 23. All the winged insects. Okay, now how many of you are really into eating insects? Just thinking about that just makes a lot of people really, it's almost as bad as the ladies thinking about eating a rat. All the winged insects that go on all fours are detestable to you. Yet among the winged insects that go on all fours, you may eat those that have jointed legs above their feet. I just want to cringe when I read that, because it's talking about the locust and the grasshopper and stuff like that. And yes, there's a lot of people that eat locusts and grasshoppers. And yes, they're supposed to be good for you. But can you just think about eating, the crawly sensation with those tough little legs with the knee joints that bend that allow them to hop? Yeah, it just, sometimes when we talk about spiritual eating, once again, maybe there's some things that make us cringe a little bit, but we need to eat it. We need to consume it. There's some things that the Bible tells us that's hard. And so we need to remember, there's some things we can eat spiritually that we need to be eating spiritually. With jointed legs above their feet, which to hop on the ground. Of them you may eat the locust of any kind, the bald locust of any kind, the cricket of any kind, and the grasshopper of any kind. But of the other winged insects that have 4 feet, these are detestable to you. I guess if all I had to eat was manna and quail, I might consider the grasshopper as something I would want to eat. But, I'm just not that that far along. Yeah, but, it's like if you have Mexican food every day, do you want to go eat Mexican food the next day? Sometimes people say, well, I had meatloaf last night. I don't want it today. Okay, spiritually, sometimes we have the Word of God day after day, and we get tired of it. So let's remember, we do need to be feeding on it. Okay, and so we see the things that are of the beasts that they could eat. And we understand that. Now, as we get into the next section on carcasses, let's think about it. It talked about the carcasses. There's a couple of things in here that I want us to... There it is. The carcass of... First section talks about the carcass of the unclean animal. And then the last one is... The second one talks about the carcass section, talks about the carcass that touches an item and what we do with those items. And then the third one is carcasses of the animals that you can eat, the clean animals. So as we go through this, think about those things. Okay. Verse 24. And by these things ye shall be unclean. Whosoever touches the carcass of them that shall be unclean until evening. I was in the American Standard. And by these things ye shall become unclean. Whosoever touches their carcass shall be unclean until the evening. I'm going to stop there for just a minute. What significance did the evening have here? Why would they be unclean until the evening?
Isn't sunset the beginning of the next day?
Yes, so it's you're unclean till the next day. That's exactly what is being said here, because their day started at evening. So during the day, they're going about. Yes, sir.
Something you got to remember before you laugh that off is legally our let's say I turned 23 on July 2nd. Technically, I turned 23 as of midnight the night before I wake up on my birthday.
Okay. Yes. So we do similar type things. Yes.
We did that about 6 hours.
So when we look at them, if they were to go through their day and they were to come in contact with a carcass during the day, at the end of the day, the beginning of the evening, or the beginning of the next day, beginning of the evening, they would be clean. So there's it's kind of makes sense when you think about that reason until the evening. And whoever carries any part of their carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean till the evening. What's the difference between coming in contact with something unclean and carrying the carcass?
Carrying the carcass probably involves more contact.
Yeah, you're going to get it on your clothes, just touching something. So it makes sense. When we read these things, it makes sense to a certain degree in some cases. Every animal that parts the hoof, but is not cloven foot, or does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. Everyone who touches them shall be unclean. Now this verse is interesting because it's in the middle of a section talking about carcasses, but it doesn't use the word carcass in it. It specifically, the verse before it uses carcass and the verse after uses carcass. This one says, anyone that touches these animals are unclean. I couldn't help but think, okay, we have dogs as pets. Can you imagine not touching a dog? Because that would have been an unclean animal. It didn't have hooves. There were dogs in their days. I just don't know that they actually made pets of them. But, the concept of just touching something and being unclean, we can associate with that. We can understand that coming in contact with certain types of things or actions or events that can affect us. So, okay, let's keep going. And all that walk on their paws among the animals that go on all fours are unclean unto you. Whoever touches their carcass shall be unclean till evening. And he who carries their carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. They are unclean to you. So you're getting the feeling of what it's saying, what they had to do. But I want to remind you of how encompassing this is. These animals that were unclean were everywhere. Verses 29 through 31. And these are unclean to you among the swarming, some of it called crawling, things that swarm on the ground. The mole rat, big surprise. The mouse, the great lizard of any kind, How many of you find a lizard in your houses in Florida? You can't get away from them. That's the only thing that I can think of kind of really worse than the lizard is the, not the cockroach, the palmetto bugs. And they seem to go everywhere. We've been blessed. We haven't really found any in our place since we live up on the 8th floor. But anyway, so the gecko, the monitor lizard, the sand lizard, the chameleon, these are unclean to you. All of them that swarm, who touches them when they are dead shall be unclean in the evening. Okay, they're living in a desert. They wake up in the morning and there's a dead lizard in their tent. Do they just leave it there? What do they do? Yeah, I can imagine they would try, but then, okay, it's been in the tent. And we'll see houses in a few seconds. So it's like, okay, you can't get away from it. They couldn't get away from the things that were unclean as hard as they tried, and I'm out of time again. And that's like us today. We live in the world that is unclean. And we have to try to, what do we do to get unclean? We have to make sure that we are clean, not in the sense that they're talking about here, but in the sense that we are clean spiritually, that we can lift holy hands to God. Real quickly, let's finish up. And anything on which any of them falls when they are dead shall be unclean, whether it is an article of wood or a garment or a skin or a sack, any article that is used for any purpose, it must be put into water, and it shall be unclean until the evening, then it shall be clean. And if any of these creatures, shall fall into earthenware vessel, all that is in it shall be unclean, and you shall break it. So, you take a clay pot, lizard falls in it, you have to break the pot. You can't clean it. So, and if you read on, I'm going to skip over some of this since we're out of time. It talks about the ovens. They were made of clay normally in this for them. So, once again, where do animals go in the cold of night? To the warm things. So we're seeing this. And it talks about in verse 36 through 38, cisterns, waters. And it talks about, okay, with the water, if one of these animals falls into it, and then the concept here is a lot of water, a spring or a cistern, something that holds water, the water's still clean. But he who takes it out is unclean. So even the concept of doing what you're supposed to do sometimes could cause them to be unclean. And we need to remember that concept. Verse 39 is a good one. And any animal which you may eat, dies. Whoever touches its carcass shall be unclean until the evening. Now, you get into this and you start thinking, wait a minute. The animals that we can't eat, lambs, wait a minute. I take them into the temple and kill them. I've touched a carcass. Am I unclean? The answer is probably no there. However, it's been proposed that if they were to die of their own or be killed out in the field, then quite possibly that's what it's talking about here. And part of the reason why people believe that is because these things belong to God. And belonging to God, if they were killed outside of the proper context, they might be being offered to one of the old idols or killed in that sense. So here the concept is talking about even the clean things can be unclean to you if done in the wrong circumstance. Now, I'm out of time. So what I want you to do, in this vein, I want you to think about some of the things for next week. The next thing that comes up is that women are unclean after childbirth, which makes absolutely no sense to me. Because they're commanded commanded. In the beginning, it was commanded by the sense of saying, be fruitful and multiply. It's an approved function. And yet, they were unclean. And even worse, for some reason, they're unclean more if they have a female child than a male child. For longer. It doesn't compute to me. We can come up with things, but the important thing is God is giving them standards to see how they are clean and how they are unclean. We need to understand that the Bible has given us standards of how we can be clean and unclean. Totally different context, spiritually clean and unclean, and that's important. So as you read through these, it's real easy to skip over because they really don't apply to us. Some of these things don't make sense. But think about, okay, what's the process here? You may not come up with anything, but you may find something that applies to help you keep your life pure so that we can be holy as God is holy. Thank you for your attention.